I literally sat in the Chancellor's office and sort of said, I'm not going till this is sorted out. That's how you get results, by presenting your cases and then making them do face to face.
Andy Street, we're in Stourbridge. What's the significance of that?
Well, I guess, Patrick, we wanted to find a lovely park that we could sit in, but there was a significance as well. We didn't really want to do this in central Birmingham because we wanted to get the message across that the Mayor for the West Midlands is genuinely for all communities in the West Midlands.
Quite a transformation, of course, for you, coming from a broadly non-political business background, and now here you are, a fully fledged party politician. How's that working for you?
Yes, you're quite right. No politics in John Lewis anyway, certainly no party politics, so very different. But actually, you know what? Some of the skills you learn in business are very relevant to this executive job. So the skill of putting a plan together, putting a team together, focusing on delivery, because this is a different political job, say, to being an MP where you're part of a team in London. This is very much around what you're going to get done for people in the West Midlands. And I think business background is, strangely enough, relevant to that.
A couple of quick ones. What do you think has been your biggest success over the past 4 years?
So I guess it's hard. It's hard. I guess the point is not an individual project, but getting the West Midlands back on the map, I would sort of describe it as. You know, we said 4 years ago there were a number of things that had got to happen: City of Culture, Commonwealth Games, HS2, and they all came through. And I think we've done a pretty good job at lobbying for the region, actually.
You know what's coming. Your biggest failure?
The biggest failure? Well, there was one we missed. And we also said in all the hustings we'd bring Channel 4 here as well. We did miss that one. And that was important because it wasn't just about that individual loss. It was something about that sector as a whole, that creative sector. So we had to learn from that, actually. And of course, the learning has led to then the whole Create Central piece coming together, and then eventually, just last week, the news of the BBC. But yeah, that was a bad day because I expected to win that one and we lost.
Your critics, Andy, including some of the other candidates, say we're still not getting a big enough slice of the spending pie, that maybe we're as much as £8 billion short of where we ought to be if we talk about levelling up the West Midlands to the UK level.
So I think that 8 billion calculation was what, looking back over 10 years actually, what was sort of owed. And I looked at that and I thought that's actually not the relevant thing to look back like that. What really matters is how are we doing now? And the truth is, and all the data's there, the truth is our relative position since I've become mayor has improved dramatically. We were bottom in terms of capital investment per head. That is true 5 years ago. We're now right in the middle of the pack and a bit above average for English regions. So we have made a dramatic improvement, and more of that is going to be needed for us to continue to recover. And so you've got to ask yourself, who is most likely to be able to get that investment from central government?
What would you say to critics who see them just as vastly expensive vanity projects?
I would say two things. Number one, they're creating jobs right now. HS2 already 12,000 jobs, and the Commonwealth Games, we're talking about, for the running of the Games, up to about 40,000 jobs. And actually we've got to make sure some of them are long-term and stick, and we're working on that through our Skills Academy, about 6,000 jobs where we're working on that element of it. So that's the first thing they create. And the second thing is the long-term benefit they're actually going to achieve. Commonwealth Games is a moment to focus the world upon the West Midlands. So I was determined to win it back in 2017, and I'm still even more certain that it's going to be really beneficial as we have the spotlight of the world here. And then if you think of HS2, that puts us right at the heart of the transport system for the country in the future. And we can see businesses locating in Birmingham on the back of that. So they're far from vanity projects, they are critical to our economic recovery.
You've been spearheading the campaign to revive high streets and town and city centres, but the big irony of ironies is that the John Lewis store, your anchor store in Birmingham, permanently closed. Aren't you really just flogging a dead horse, really, given what we're seeing in town and city centres and the flight to online retail and so on? Is it not really time to just face reality?
No, it's not. It may be time to face that there are changes and we've got to work with the changes.
But retail is never going to be what it was. What are they going to become?
Retail, so there'll still be strong retail in our city centres and certainly in our local centres. There's a huge trend towards local shopping, but let's go back to the city centres. Of course there'll be some retail left. Think of the great success of Selfridges and Primark in Birmingham, for example, but we've got to think of other new things in the city. And let's talk of Coventry in that respect, because I think actually there is a really brilliant redevelopment proposal in Coventry, where we're talking about a lot more housing in the city, we're talking about some commercial activities, but we're also right at that centrepiece, a big performance space, and it talks about how a city centre will be generated with different things in the future. And of course, we know we've just won a huge amount of investment for towns across the Black Country, Wolverhampton, West Brom, and indeed Rowley Regis, for thinking about their regeneration, all about new facilities in town centres, as well as protecting the best of retail.
And a lot of tied up in transport, of course, mentioning that, metro to the Black Country, opening suburban train services connecting into Birmingham, for example. But £100 million in the budget, that sounds a lot of money, but it's not really, is it? And for most people who are voting in this election, their experience, mainly outside lockdown, is of transport congestion, delays, frustration, and frankly, public transport not always very appealing.
Pre-pandemic, the facts are there were more people using our trains, huge growth in trains, huge growth on the metro, and actual growth on buses.
Congested trains. We saw pictures, every morning, noon and night on television of people packed into trains running through particularly Birmingham Street, New Street to Worcestershire and the Black Country and so on, absolutely crammed in like sardines.
So if you look at our rail investment, first of all, we are opening new lines, we know that. That will of course give new opportunities, but we're also bringing new rolling stock. So the most congested line, of course, the Cross City line. Later this year, a complete new set of trains comes, 40% more capacity on them. So we've responded decisively to that. But if you go to the most basic element of transport, buses, of course, really pleased that the last 4 years we've seen fares held absolutely flat, frozen, and that's why more people were using them, when across the country a lot less people were using them. So actually we were seeing a real revival of public transport here. And just one other statistic around this, Patrick, because it really does talk of what's happening. If you look at what's being invested in our public transport now, it's 5 times what it was in the year before I became mayor. So we've done exactly what we said we would do and bring about a huge step up of investment there.
Rough sleepers, another of your big priorities when you came in. But I could say to you, as your critics do, that basically at the moment you've merely sort of relocated the problem during the pandemic, and a lot of the people who are in this position are in hotels, which is not a sustainable situation, and that frankly the malaise of homelessness is every bit as serious as it ever has been.
And I would say that's categorically wrong. So first of all, we have clearly reduced the number of people sleeping on the streets. Great collaborative effort. It's actually down by 75% in 2 years across all of the 7 boroughs of the West Midlands.
Outside of the pandemic? In terms of putting people in hotels, which has obviously had a cosmetic effect in terms of
so the
taking
numbers of rough sleepers have reduced, but what's actually been the long-term solution, not the hotel, the long-term solution is the scheme that we call Housing First, and we've now got 377 people into that, and that compares with just 44 people left sleeping on the street. So there has been a long-term solution, and indeed now we're looking through the government to support unprecedented amount of money on the table for all this move-on accommodation for people who did move into hotels. But that Housing First is a long-term solution enabling people to re-establish their lives. It is very far from a short-term cosmetic fix.
I think I'm right in saying that you're targeting something like 215,000 new homes by 2031.
You are right.
17,000 or so last year,
yes.
So that's frankly short of the curve. Needs to do better if you're going to hit that target.
No, it's not short of the curve, it's actually on the curve. If you look at that for every year and the curve that we need to be on, we're absolutely on it. And more importantly, we've actually doubled the number of homes over the last few years to give us confidence of the pace that we're going. And within that doubling, we've also doubled over the last 5 years the number of affordable homes. So I would say that we are making exactly the progress that we said we would make on that.
There's a widespread perception, Andy, that Northern England gets a better deal in terms of the slice of the public spending cake, that they're politically better organised with people like Andy Burnham getting in the government's face. Whereas in the Midlands, there's a sense that you're too collegiate, too easygoing with the government, and that sort of reduces the deal that we get out of the centre.
And the evidence doesn't support that view at all. Yeah, my way of going about it is about negotiating with them rather than, you might say, haranguing them almost, was Sandy Burnham's approach last year. And the evidence is we have brought in the investment as a consequence of that. So let's just look at some of the big things that's happened. HS2, I was pretty much on the front foot doing my persuasion of the government to get behind that. If you look at the housing deal, which has led to this doubling of homes, I was down in the office of the Chancellor talking about that. Didn't need to stand on a public platform to do it, but it brought the results. If you look at the metro investment in the Black Country, I literally sat in the Chancellor's office and sort of said, I'm not going till this is sorted out. Again, that's how you get results, by presenting your cases and then making them do face to face, rather than a sort of what you might call megaphone diplomacy. The evidence is clear. The investment that's come into the West Midlands has increased rapidly in the last 5 years.
If the picture is that rosy, were you to lose, maybe, to Liam Byrne, the picture is presumably very close. We think this election is going to be very hard fought, this election. Would you write a letter to him saying, Mr. Mayor, there's loads of money left?
I would say, Liam, you are going to enjoy the next few years, because lots of the things that we've won the investment for over the last few years are going to come to fruition in this next mayoral term. And that's probably something he would celebrate.
You're expecting a close fight?
It's going to be very close. Politics that you know better than anybody else, given your previous role. You know that politics is very, very balanced in the West Midlands, and that's a good thing, actually. And the fact we've got 4 Labour councils, 3 Tory councils sort of says it. It's a very balanced place. So it's going to be close, and it's going to be a good contest.
Andy Street, thank you very much indeed.